welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping straight into a pretty major report, looking at what it calls the political decline of the Western powers. Now, to be clear, we're not talking about some kind of sudden collapse here. It's more about digging into the evidence for a relative shift in global power, and maybe more importantly, this erosion of internal resilience they talk about.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful to get the framework clear right at the start. The report really structures this idea of decline along three lines, three axes. First, there's domestic political quality, basically. How healthy are the democracies themselves? Second is institutional trust and cohesion. Do people actually believe in the systems? And third, geopolitical and economic hegemony, the West's sort of global standing and influence. It probably makes sense to start where the report seems most concerned, which is the internal picture.
Okay, yeah, let's do that. So, domestic political quality. One thing that really jumps out is this idea that democratic backsliding isn't just happening out there anymore. It's showing up within core Western countries. We're seeing examples, right? Political moves, undermining courts, weakening legislatures, that kind of thing. But the report also flags things like declining press freedom, citing data from, groups like International IDA and Freedom House. That feels quite concrete.
It is, and it feeds directly into that second axis, the crisis of institutional trust. There's a specific data point mentioned, the Edelman Trust Barometer from 2024. It showed trust in government, trust in media, often falling below that sort of 60% level in many developed nations. That's considered not trusting, basically.
Below 60%.
Yeah. And the key consequence isn't just like general unhappiness. It really fuels this distrust in expertise itself. You see it with science, right? Complex issues get politicized. Climate change, public health.
Absolutely. And when you lose that shared basis in facts and expertise, how do you even make policy? It leads to gridlock, doesn't it? Sort of an inability to act strategically long term.
Exactly. You get domestic inertia, which, as you say, definitely translates into strategic weakness on the world stage. Which brings us neatly to that third axis, geopolitical and economic hegemony.
Right. The global picture.
So look, the West is still incredibly wealthy, no question. But the report argues its relative economic dynamism is, it's slowing down. Things like sluggish productivity, high levels of structural debt, these are acting as drags.
And meanwhile, others aren't standing still. The report talks about emerging market blocks like BRICS plus MUNR. Just in terms of population and GDP share, they represent a huge chunk of the world now. And they're not exactly shy about wanting to move away from purely Western-led financial systems.
That's a key point. This idea of losing financial centrality. We hear about de-dollarization efforts, maybe overblown sometimes, but the structural shift is China's role as a creditor. Through things like the Belt and Road Initiative, China's become the biggest bilateral lender to many developing countries, replacing traditional Western institutions in that role. That gives Beijing significant leverage, economic and political.
So the upshot is that countries in the global south are perhaps quite rationally diversifying their relationships. Looking to China for infrastructure, maybe Russia for security partners, Gulf states for investment capital, treating them as alternatives, not just relying on the West.
Precisely. It's a more multipolar approach from their perspective. And this is happening alongside what the report calls the deepening alignment of a challenger bloc. Think Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, working more closely together.
Okay, so pulling it all together, what does the report say are the deep roots of all this?
It points to a mix of things, really, a confluence, they call it. Things like socioeconomic inequality building up over time within Western countries, the impact of digital disruption, how social media fragments our sense of shared reality, and then maybe a bit of strategic overstretch or, frankly, complacency after the Cold War ended, sort of assuming things would just continue.
Right. So the conclusion isn't doom and gloom exactly, but it's sobering. The decline is relative compared to others, but it's presented as real.
But crucially, the report says it's not, like, irreversible destiny, right?
Not at all. The West still has immense strengths, innovation, deep capital markets, alliances. But the report is pretty clear that reversing the trend hinges on political choices made soon, like in the next 2 to 5 years.
And what are the key levers for that?
2 main things stand out. Rebuilding that institutional trust we talked about earlier that requires real political reform. And second, serious, aggressive investment in economic and technological renewal, really focusing on future drivers of growth and resilience. Okay, so choices matter. It's not predetermined. Which leads to a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. If the report flags strategic complacency as one of the root causes, what specific domestic structural reform, maybe one that's currently being overlooked or ignored, do you think is the most crucial for adapting effectively to this new multipolar reality? Something to think about.